Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I'm Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. Today in AI Special Series, we take up a theme that is very close to my heart. And no, it's not politics. Today we talk about education and how Gen AI would impact education. And to discuss the same, we are joined by Dr. Alp Sungu. Dr. Alp Sungu is an assistant professor of operations, information, and decisions at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He studies the interplay between technology, policy, and society. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, sir.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
So, history quite often repeats itself, and new technologies, whether that was writing to printing press to calculators, then mobile phones and internet, all these technologies were initially viewed with a lot of suspicion.
Mhm.
In light of this, how do you see Gen AI? Is it a truly disruptive force in education and human cognition, or is it simply a latest chapter in a long history of such disruptions?
Mhm. Well, it totally is disruptive, but that doesn't mean it's a part of the continuum. But let me break it down. So it is very disruptive because I think that there are a couple of things that makes it very exciting. It changes how the way in which people work, and particularly what excites a lot of researchers, policymakers, companies is how much effect it has on productivity. And I want to give you a benchmark on this, what created the Industrial Revolution, the invent of the machinery, steam engine machinery. Um, Research shows that innovation, the introduction of steam engine, another disruptive force, was able to increase productivity based on several researches and around like 12 to 14, 16%. But early research shows, and estimates vary, but generative AI's impact on productivity can go as high as like 40, 50%. So if really, and we believe, and there's a lot of theory that suggests like productivity is what generates economic development and technology progress. So it might be the next big or maybe the big thing that could potentially enhance productivity and hence the human capital development. So in that sense, it is disruptive. But it also, you're right that there are a lot of, it fundamentally affects how we learn, how we work. But at the same time, there were multiple many technologies that came and started with suspicion, like calculators. When the first calculators are introduced, a lot of people were thinking, hey, it's going to hurt people's math skills and maybe will hurt our abilities. So whether it heals or introduces skills to people is something that should be of question. But when a new technology arrives, I think it takes time for it to integrate to the society and people to internalize this idea. And there is this saying that I really like: technology moves faster than culture. So I think there's a bit of time for the technology to be integrated to the society. But then there will be something else. And I think why we think it's very disruptive is because it affects a lot of things. But why we think this is the disruptive force, because we don't know what's going to be the next big thing, right? Like it was press, as you were saying, like on calculator, internet. Like when we saw internet say like, hey, it's going to change the world, and it did change the world. But among the things that changed the world, among the series of technology related disruptions, this is, I think, at the contemporary world is the big thing today, and there will be, I believe, another big thing that will come tomorrow.
But your paper titled Generative AI Can Harm Learning sounds a rather cautionary note.
Mhm.
What leads you to believe that Gen AI may hinder rather than help learning outcomes?
Well, surprisingly enough, I think as a university professor, when I was in high school, I wasn't one of the hardworking like front benchers. And when I see these tools, I think like one of those students where, hey, like how can I use this to make my life easier? And I think it's very obvious. To be fairly honest, when we started this research, we were not thinking that we're going to write a paper about potential harms. That was something that, that we were discussing, but originally our goal was to say like, hey, like, what is the impact and how can it help? Because when you use it, I myself, when I try to learn a new methodology, I myself use generative AI extensively to, immerse myself into concept. But what we ended up finding in an experiment where essentially students prepare for an exam either with their books or with ChatGPT, we find that when they have the books and ChatGPT with them, they do significantly better in ChatGPT or like generative AI. GPT-4 backed API is what we use. And when they have generative AI, they do significantly better. But when you take the books and laptops away, in the final exam, those who prepare the exam with books did significantly better. And part of what's going on is when you analyze what sort of questions students ask to the large language model is, what is the answer? Or they copy paste the question and they try to get the answer. So I think instead of using the technology as a learning tool, which certainly has these capabilities, they use it as almost like an answer machine. And that really affects the immersion into the concepts, and therefore, when you have the tool with you, you ask for the answer, and it's a very smart tool, so it gives you the answer, and your answer is correct, and your performance is better than what we would have done had you just had the book that doesn't really give just the spoon feeding you the answer. But when you take the tool away, what you read and what you write in the top practice sheet is not necessarily, I believe, what you internalize. So that is part of the reason why we see that sort of crutch effect, essentially.
I teach at graduate level, and I've realized that the easiest way to know whether a student has copied pasted from ChatGPT is to just simply ask one of the words they have written. And most
Mm-hmm.
of the times, they are just clueless about what they have written. And it's not learning aid. They're just trying to copy paste, and it really hurts what they were supposed to learn throughout the semester. But the phrasing of your title does suggest that while harm is possible, it's not inevitable, a subtle but important distinction. So, what are the key variables that you think would tip the scale one way or another, and what safeguards could you suggest to ensure that Gen AI remains a boon and not a bane for education?
It can, I mean, this is like one case that we find where it might harm learning. I personally believe in the potential of generative AI on improving outcomes. In fact, like after that project, I sort of dedicated a lot of my research time into designing systems where we can make it useful for students. And I think also briefly to mention one potential sort of positive note here is that experiment is not books versus generative AI. It is books versus traditional generative AI, and a generative AI that is designed to behave like a tutor. And what we told is we didn't train a fancy model. What we did is we take the standard GPT tool, but in the third group, what we told GPT is don't give away the answers. You're a tutor. Your goal is to introduce students to these new concepts, help them learn. And then sometimes, models make mistakes, so we also give the right answer. But again, I want to underline this, like, don't give away the answer. And the group that has GPT that does not give away the answer and knows the correct answer did as good as the books group in the final exam. And we're just a group of researchers that run one project where we did a couple of prompt engineering. It's not a tool that has trained or fine-tuned on models and a lot of computer scientists and education experts. It's not like a product that we build. It's a it's a modification that we built on what's exists, what's available out there. So in that case, I think there's a lot of positive opportunity to design tools that can be useful for systems. What are the guardrails? I think one thing that I realize is, if the students are using this as an answer machine, if one can design a system, I think pedagogical infrastructure where getting the right answer is not necessarily the reward, then it might potentially, and I am working on this, I don't have like a scientific answer to this or evidence towards this question, but what I can speculate based on our findings is, we reward our students based on the correct answers they give. But that creates an incentive for students to find the correct answer. If we are incentivizing students instead of the answer, but the pathways that they searched, and it might be difficult to sort of evaluate it, but creating not creating incentives on the giving the right answer, but creating incentives on exploring different answers, I think the way in which they would use the tool would be better, would be different. At least that's how I myself using that tool. One sort of potential practical tip could be, like, if you are giving a, essay writing homework to a student, and or like giving a test homework where they can easily just copy paste the questions, get the answer, and give you the correct answer sheet, or write the essay in 30 seconds. I don't see immediately how in today's world grading those those homeworks is relevant, because it creates an incentive for low performing students who wouldn't hand in their homework to just like get it done in 30 seconds. And also for hardworking students, or who have more academic motivation. Now, like, I'm in the state where I can like read it, learn, just like a hardworking student, or I'm in a race, and potentially my peers are easily like giving away the answer, getting the answer. So I also have an incentive to use. So like it pushes everybody to just like use it as an answer machine if you start grading things. So I'm again, I don't have scientific evidence for this, but I'm strongly believing that, I think if it's a chat GPT-able or like generative AI-able homework, grading, I don't think it's an immediate tool. I think there are a couple of things, like how we evaluate students, how we grade students is one question. It's easier to say than said than done, but redesigning curriculums, training students on AIs, providing tools that are more conducive to learning, could be potential alternatives. And I sort of want to circle back on what I said of a tutor AI as opposed to generic AI. In our experiment, what we find is this version of AI that does not give away the answer and is a tutor, despite that it might be a little more annoying, because again, like 75% of the time students were asking for the answer and one just gives away and the other one does not. Despite this sort of annoying factor, students did like the tutor better than the generic AI. So this might suggest that, yes, although there's all this crutch effect, they might also be interested in or have preference towards a tool that is more conducive to learning. And I think, public-private partnerships, or like companies can build these tools, and schools should potentially think about bringing those tools to the classrooms, and there might be some demand for preference for the tools that are more as an AI tutor as opposed to an AI answer machine.
In countries like India, and I want to ask you from a more institutional perspective, that educational institution was still finding footing in their digital era. Some of it was like accelerated in the COVID pandemic time where students were forced to take online classes. Again, it was really new for us. Uh, and now the sudden advent of Gen AI has thrown another wrench in the works. How should universities and school keep pace with this rapid evolution of technology? And what would a forward-looking, resilient response to these technologies look like?
Mhm. Well, I think with disruptive forces, a lot of norms are reconsidered and rethought, and I don't think there is one silver bullet great answer for this question. A lot of researchers are asking this question and try to come up with ideas. I think with changes, not necessarily only on Gen AI, but like with any big changes, instead of being against it, really first trying to understand it should be that does sound like a reasonable approach. So for educators, if I were running a university, I would like run a training program for faculty so that they themselves could think about how they can integrate this tool to their courses. It could harm in some cases. It can tremendously help in other cases. And it varies across topics that you cover, concepts, the type of teaching style that you have. So it would vary a lot. But I think being against it would not necessarily, I think, in the case of generative AI, um, would not necessarily help it. But really understanding, if you know how something works, then you can respond rather by integrating or by modifying or by partially disabling it. Um, I think you will have more information means better response. We are right now running a study where we introduce a Gen AI tool to teachers in K-12 education, not at the higher education. Um, and there are other researchers who are doing it with university professors. It typically is a tool is used as a tool to make the content more relatable to their students or um, to design course materials. I think those are like two big use cases for that I have seen that teachers use these tools for. And I think just being up to date, like for educational institutes, it's being up to date on what is new, what this can do, cannot do, engage with practitioners, engage with policymakers, have sessions, have events. So um, if the effects on productivity, if the effects of the potential that this tool has, especially on the breadth of tasks that um, it can deliver it makes it very exciting, and just knowing what it can or cannot do, being up to date on this will help you stay up in the game, I guess.
Taking Gen I away from these educational settings and to talk about it in more broad terms, do you think Gen AI poses an existential challenge to the very basic idea that human beings are intellectually superior to other beings, like having an AI agent in now the intellectual environments? And also the fact that we are outsourcing most of our cognitive tasks. What would the future of learning look like then?
It is a rather philosophical question, I'd say. So like I'll share my personal take rather than like what we know from research, because I don't know from an existential standpoint how much objective evidence we have. But uh, there is a sort of school of thought that believes in solutionism, where fundamentally what they think is, in rough terms, technology can solve humanity's all problems. And then what is the role of being a human? So I think generative AI is one of those like big jumps where we restart thinking about this and whether the solutionism is a sort of realistic sort of thought slash belief. But I don't believe it poses any existential threat. It changes how we learn. It's going to change how we learn. It's going to change how we work. Um, Fundamentally, I think knowledge scarcity was very valuable, both from a societal and from a financial standpoint. And now it's sort of take away that value of knowledge scarcity. Something like, I don't think it's going to replace doctors, obviously, or lawyers. We will need them, and the society will value them. But if you think about, I think that the most stark example is typically with lawyers and doctors. Only a small percent of the society knows of how to treat a particular type of disease, but everybody needs that information. When you need to file something and you need a lawyer support, that knowledge is so scarce, and hence when you need it, it's so valuable, that it creates a lot of differentiation from the society. Now I think information is becoming a little bit more democratized. So in that sense, how we perceive different segments of society, or the value of knowledge, can be a challenge. So I think it sort of helps us rethink and elevate the role of creativity and sort of the learning process and beyond. For how we work is going to affect differently. I think going back in history, in sort of 1600 century, the definition of a genius or an intellect is more based on people's language abilities. If you think, like, if you read those books where you have like paragraphs, say like Charles Dickens, you read you read the book and you see like one paragraph, one sentence, all commas, and sophisticated language, and because that was what's scarce and valuable and differentiating in the society at that point in time. And now in the sort of information age where we are, I think, growing up, the math skills, especially quick math skills, is almost synonymous with the word genius or higher IQ. And I think that sort of quick absorption of quantitative concepts might become somewhat less valuable if it's democratized more, if the tools are able to deliver some of these tasks slightly better. We say like he's a coding genius, but now if the AI can code as good as the top coders, and OpenAI says like their, I think, O3 model is like within the world's top 50 coders. So if we're getting to a place where we don't need to code as good, then the demand for this will change. My personal opinion is, I think we are going somewhat from moving from a world where we value the quantitative technical skills to, and this it won't happen overnight, but in the long run, what I believe is we are potentially moving to a world where we value human creativity and innovativeness more. And part of the reasons is, I think, is a concept called mystification that is in art. If you build the same mathematical model whether a human builds a mathematical model or an AI builds a mathematical model, it serves for the same purpose. But even if you can fully replicate a human art, and it's impossible for a viewer to distinguish whether that art is from by a human or by a mathematical model or an AI, as the observer, I would still like or appreciate the human generated art more. And I'll tell you why. Because what makes art interesting or valuable for many is the thought process that goes behind. Like, you look at the paintings of, say like Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, and you say, oh, like there's this little, maybe like wine glass here represents the transition from life and death, or like this is his love, or this is like his message to God. And maybe there are a lot of looking at the paintings and making sense of it, or looking at the music, listening to the music, and sort of building stories to understand the thought process going behind that. When an AI produces something, you take away that value from me. So it's not on the output, but it's on the production process where we value things. And therefore, I think although like for some arts where if you're building logos for companies, it might become a little more difficult as an artist. I'm not saying it's going to make artists' life difficult or easier, but I think it might increase the value of art in the society.
I also feel that in artistic forms, the complexities of emotions, the contradictions, the experiences that humans have through which new art is generated, because times are changing, so do these contradictions and experiences, which cannot be replicated, right? As
Absolutely.
our lives are changing and how we make sense of it, AI cannot probably do that. So I hope art lives on, and those who appreciate art live on. Now, to turn to another one of your paper, The Digital Lives of the Poor, Entertainment Traps and Information Isolation. You bring to light a paradox that is often overlooked in mainstream narratives, that while AI and digital and AI technologies are criticized for undermining learning in formal settings, your research reveals an even more sobering truth, that is, access to digital tools, which are often understood to be a proxy for progress under the Sustainable Development Goals. It does not necessarily translate into meaningful informational empowerment. To what extent did your findings on mobile usage, underserved population, reveal patterns of digital consumption that reinforce rather than reduce existing inequalities? And how do these insights challenge the prevailing assumption that connectivity alone levels the development playing field?
What really drove that research inquiry was the observation that when you look at phones in a developed country setting, all people talk about, policymakers, researchers, social media addiction. Is it bad for students? Is it addictive and harm well-being? But when you get to the base of the pyramid, Marcus, all it is a source of information. Low-income communities are isolated from markets, isolated from information. Maybe there is this bug attacking your farm, and you don't know how to deal with this. You don't know whether you should breastfeed your kid when you are sick or not, but there is this knowledge available out there, how to deal with those, improve your crop yield, how to, do, early child development. So that brings that, when you give a phone with just click of a button, it disseminates information. So you bring low income communities back to information and market. And you go to these communities and interact with folks, especially when they have a smartphone, you realize they watch the same YouTube videos, they do the same TikTok dances, and that is particularly important for their sort of entertainment goods consumption, because financial liquidity constraint reduces access to a lot of these vice activities, like going to cinema, going for a holiday, a nice dinner with friends. So those activities are typically less common in low-income communities, but doesn't matter which economic strata you belong to, you watch the same Netflix series. So it really brings out those, financially less able communities into a almost like more like uniform platform with people. So we thought like, hey, like, are they really using it as only a tool for accessing, like improving their livelihoods, or is there like an entertainment trap? And I'm certainly not saying that entertainment is bad. Like, this is one of the key tools, and it is, I think, good for, like, if it's utility maximizing, people do have and should have, I personally believe, access to these entertainment sources. But what is its implication on this entertainment use? Is the implication on individuals accessing information? And we figured that once you have the data, you spend so much time and data on YouTube and social media, and therefore through the end of the month you are almost running out of data, and that hurts your accessing information because you don't have the data. You're offline again, isolated from markets and information. So that is not necessarily a digital divide story between people who have access or who don't, but it tells like giving access is not necessarily important. And I think it raises the question that can we design a platform environment, not only give the tool, but design a user experience, an interface, a platform that is more conducive to accessing information. Like if government is governments and a lot of international intergovernmental organizations send out messages to communities, but perhaps providing access to data is also like a dimension that they could care, or like how should we design the data plans? How should we design the interface? How the data plans should be allocated to different types of websites. It brings a lot of sort of practical questions. But I think going back to the question on whether this creates a digital divide per se, and tying it to the AI, at the individual levels, this is a barrier, but it does not suggest that people shouldn't have phones. I think people are still better off than not having phones. But there's a stream of literature that says like and this goes both ways. I think there are different thoughts on this, but especially with AI, at the industrial level, there are companies that are more well off, who are able to absorb the knowledge and integrate AI into their systems and enjoy the benefits of this technology. And then there would be companies who are unable to do so, so they were already lower in the competition game, and then they're like immediately worse off, like they would be substantially worse off. So it would widen the gap between the high performing and low performing um, firms. Entertainment use might not necessarily create a digital device story, but I think it is a important welfare question. And what we also have seen is potential digital addiction and its impact, not only through like accessing information on markets, but its externalities on well-being and mental health and social cohesion, and like all the things that we worry about. Potential negative effects of social media and individual welfare can potentially be even more prominent in economically disadvantaged communities, because there are less alternatives, there are less distractions oftentimes, so that might become a even more significant part of human lives. And that might potentially raise concerns on the impact of these technologies on individual well-being.
To summarize our discussion and to end on a rather positive note, looking ahead, what policies do you believe should be put in place to ensure that Gen AI and AI supports learning outcomes rather than cause disruptions?
There is this debate called Clark-Cosmo debate, where it says, technology, not necessarily Gen AI, but Gen AI, I believe, potentially fits into that. That says, is technology a tool to improve? Does technology improve learning, or is it just a tool to communicate information? Like you can think about this as a truck delivering food. So the truck comes to you faster. It's not the truck that is nutritious, but it still enables giving sort of enhancing access to more pedagogical material. But at the same time, you can also think like, hey, like all the visuals and reminders that would go and make you read course material can potentially also help learning. From a policy standpoint, I believe first thing is like banning is not, I believe, what people should do. I don't know how to exercise a ban. Even for like experiments, even for a short period of time, even for researchers with carefully done, very microscopic studies, it's very difficult to prevent access. New York State tried it at some point in early 2023. They lifted the ban. Keeping up to date on what is going around, I think, and try to learn and integrate it rather than fighting it sounds more relevant. I think at the government level, not only for learning, but like institutionally supporting the research and development, depending on on the government agenda and what capabilities that company have that the country has, integrating into this technology and including AI into what is it that you're delivering and enhancing what you do, and putting like investment in research and development, creating sort of incentives or potential subsidies for companies and educational institutes to potentially further sort of invest and explore these potentially disruptive technologies, can potentially be relevant. From an educational policy standpoint, I think it is more about designing the right pedagogical structure that would internalize and embrace this tool. And I think this is an ongoing process, and a lot of people are, including educators and researchers, I think, are working on it, and it's very like case specific. But I think again, like immersing it rather than fighting against it it sounds like a reasonable choice.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this very engaging and very insightful conversation. And